Hello, everyone. I hope you all can hear me. I am Garima Jain, your favorite Android GD from India. My day job is to over-engineer Android apps at GoDaddy. And today we have the Jetpack panel here at your disposal. So if you have any questions regarding any of the Jetpack libraries like Hilt, paging, architecture components, Compose, data store, etc., like that maybe that burning question about Compose that you always wanted to ask, or something you might be wondering about the new paging library, or just anything, just shoot them their way, not mine. But before that, let's hear some introductions from the team. And let's start with Nick.
Hey, my name is Nick Butcher. I'm on the Android Developer Relations team, and I work on all things UI and lately a lot on Jetpack Compose.
Hey, I'm Florina Muntenescu. I'm also an engineer in the Android Developer Relations team, and I work with architecture components, Kotlin, and a little bit of Compose.
Hi everyone, I'm Manuel Vivo. I also work in the same team, Developer Relations team at Go. And yeah, I'm basically focusing on Kotlin and coroutines, architecture components, and Hilt, and dependency injection in particular, and also Jetpack Compose.
Hey, my name is Sergey. I work on Android X libraries, different ones. Lately, I'm working with Studio as well quite a lot, different tooling. So yeah, I can probably mix questions on both sides of things, tooling and libraries.
I'm Clara. I'm a tech lead and manager in the London team. I work mostly with Compose.
And hey, I'm Nick Rout. I'm a developer relations engineer, and I focus on material design on Android.
So, now that we have heard the introductions from everyone, should we start with the questions? I see we have a few questions from the attendees. So the very first question is, what causes that from outside it looks like Google's strategy is more about starting new libraries, ton of new alpha releases instead of focusing on quality, deliver, tested, production-ready libraries that devs will not be afraid to use from day one?
I can take this one. I think we have a big philosophy on trying to engage with the developers. So the biggest reason why we put alphas out there and why we engage really early is we really, really want to get feedback. So this was something that we really started with the architecture component libraries, and we really wanted to engage from day one and be able to shape and mold those libraries in response to what developers wanted from us. So in a way, we think this is a huge positive in that we can iterate and not just come up with a library that then turns out does not solve the issues you have.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, let me add one more thing. It's kind of like you don't have to use them in alpha state. It's the main thing. Like you can still wait and use like when it's reached the RC or a stable release, and then it will be stable, and then you can reuse it, and it will be definitely like production ready. There isn't like binary compatibility guarantees and so on and so on and so on. So like yes, we are open about what we are doing, but doesn't mean that you have to use alpha library.
Yeah, and I think that alpha version is pretty important for us. I would argue that they are high quality and also they are tested, but also we sometimes don't know if we are going to meet developers' expectations. So it doesn't mean a lot for us to spend a lot of time trying to polish those APIs and spending months working on them if by the end of the day it's not going to solve your needs. So we need that quick feedback loop from you, and that's why we have alpha. So we need to make sure that it adjusts to your expectations, like all the requests that you might have, we are fulfilling it and working on it. And so that's why that feedback is so important. Having the alpha cycle is pretty mandatory for us as well. So please use alphas and file all the bugs that you find. We cannot find it internally without you.
True. So let's move on to the next one. What are the main differences between Compose and other similar solutions from React, Flutter, and why should I invest in learning Compose?
I can start trying to answer this one. So there are many similarities. I think we kind of took a lot of inspiration from the state of the art of creating reactive UIs out there. So we kind of, when we were creating something for Android or looking what Android needed, we looked at what was in the field, and people love the declarative nature of those toolkits you've talked about. But some things that we think Compose brings is that it doubles down on the fact that Android developers love Kotlin, so it's written in Kotlin and uses a lot of the expressive language features and things like coroutines in order to build, something very Androidy. It's also from the Android team, and so we work very hard on integrating it very, very closely into a lot of the Android solutions. So things like live data and view models and other architectural components. We work very hard, or we'll continue to work very hard to make sure that Compose will play nicely and interoperate with those components you've already invested in and built upon. And to that point, we've also built it very much for adopting at your own pace, incremental adoption. Unlike some of the other solutions, you might have to, start again. With Compose, we very much built it to be a lot like Kotlin really itself, where you can convert just, a single button or a single screen and just adopt at your own pace. You don't have to do a big bang rewrite. So I think those are some of the main things from it. There's obviously some technical differences as well in the way they're implemented that we think can give you some better performance than some of these other solutions. But really, I think the main point is it's built by the Android team to have great integrations with the Android stack and for incremental adoption. Anyone else want to add to that?
So, while we're talking about Compose, so we have another question like, what technical hurdles need to be solved before Compose is production ready?
So I can try. It depends on whether you're saying what hurdles we need to solve or what hurdles developers need to solve. On our side, we're still ironing out a couple of things. So for example, accessibility is not fully there. So we're trying to really nail that down. We did a shift in the last few months. We've started using coroutines for things like input emotion, and that is not complete yet. Like we're in the middle of a big migration there that needs to settle. I think those are the biggest things that we're looking forward to for beta. Otherwise, a lot of polish. So based on our standards for libraries, when we move to beta, we're going to freeze the API or try to make as little changes to API between beta and release. So to us, it's a big hurdle to go through of just committing to all the APIs that are there and deciding that it's good enough for a 1.0. I think that's the biggest hurdle that we are looking forward to.
One more I'd add is accessibility. We know that accessibility at the alpha stage wasn't where we wanted it for a beta release, so that's one thing the team is hard at work on as well. We definitely need to get the accessibility support in for beta.
Okay, so the next one is, would live data be deprecated in favor of stateflow?
I can take this one. Not really. I mean, it is not going to be deprecated in the foreseeable future for different reasons. First reason is live data is a library widely adopted by the community. So obviously we have to support it and all the users of the library. And secondly is that it's the main reason for communicating between the UI and the view model layer in the Java language programming world. So in Kotlin, it's true that we have the stateflow alternative, but still we need to make some work from the Google side, from the tooling side as well, to make it easier to consume, for example, from the UI layer. So we are working on it very hard we are listening to your feedback, as I was saying before, and we are trying to make it as good as possible. But yeah, it won't be deprecated this time because it needs to be supported. But yeah, like stateflow is another option that you can use if you're interested in.
Thanks, Manu. So we have a lot of questions with Compose. So coming back to Compose, the next question is, how will earlier versions of Android support apps built with Compose?
I'll take this one. Compose is a library, so as such, it is completely independent. We've built everything on public API from the Android system. So in theory, it is self-standing. The reality is there are things that we need. Our current minimum SDK is 21, which is Lollipop. And the main reason for that is it's when the runtime changed on Android. And the older runtime, we don't think we'll be able to support like the memory pressure and the different things that we do. Otherwise, there's some kind of technical glitches between versions, like the tech stack. We are using the Android tech stack and it changes between versions. We're trying to handle all of that for the developer. So we're taking care of making sure it works across all versions down to 21, so that's not an issue for a developer. So developers should see no changes using Compose all the way down to 21.
Thanks, Clara. So the next question is, are you working on a tool to convert an XML layout in an @composable function? If not, how do you suggest we migrate existing apps more easily to Compose UI?
I'll take this one as well. We originally had an XML converter. So it's one of the first things we built. We had back in the beginning of Compose. Compose actually used XML syntax, which is very interesting. So then we had a converter that would take your XML layouts and then spit out the Compose XML looking syntax that we had then. The reality was we did some studies with it and it was very confusing because Compose is not XML and it doesn't behave in the same way. And developers, when they were translating it, they expected everything to work. And the reality is they're two very different paradigms. And the conversion tool was almost a mistaken step. It was always causing problems, bugs, and people didn't really understand that you have to shift the way you build your UI. So that's why we stopped working on that. So we do not have an XML to Compose converter, and we don't plan on having one at the moment. Because it was such a weird experience. We hope we're buying a lot into interop, so you don't have to completely rewrite your app. You can rewrite little pieces and you can go little by little and start replacing things if that's what you want to. We do have some XML stuff that I think Nick Rout could speak to.
Yeah, so while not layouts for XML themes, if you're using the material design components library in your view-based app at the moment, we do have a library called MDC Android Compose Theme Adapter, which will extract your color, type, and shape theming parameters from your MDC theme, and then make them available as a Compose material theme in pretty much a one-liner. So that's a handy tool for showing theme parameters, but not layouts.
I'll just add a little bit to that. There is actually also a third-party implementation of this. So, while we're not working on this, if it's something you really actively want to pursue, then it's an open ecosystem, and somebody's already built a copy-paste tool that will copy XML code and paste composable code. So you can try that out.
Okay, thanks. Let's take another one about Compose, then we'll try to go into something else and come back to Compose later on. So the next one is, well, if data binding is in place for UI layer, then how we can migrate easily with Compose to design UI layer?
Yeah, I can take a swing at that. Compose and data binding are kind of alternatives, really. If you think about Compose, what it does is convert data into UI. You think of it as like a functional transform of your data into UI. So there's no need to then bind data to it because that's already what it does. The good thing is if you're designing for data binding, if you're moving towards an architecture a bit like MVI or MVVM, where you basically have an object representing the data that you want to then bind to UI, it's normally a very easy step to, instead of binding it, you then just go to directly converting it into UI. So I would argue that if you're using data binding, you're probably setting yourself up well with your architecture, your underlying architecture, where you have some kind of view model or presenter or whatever it may be, publishing some stream of data. And that's going to set you up really, really well for Compose, which is going to take that and then just do an alternative, which is just convert it into the UI.
Okay. Moving a little bit away from Compose, we'll come back to Compose a little bit later. So when can we expect preferences data store to be ready for use in large-scale production app?
Yeah, I can take this one. So we don't have a concrete date, but I can tell you what the features we're working on for beta. So right now we're in progress with the RxJava support for data store, and then we're still deciding whether stuff like encryption should be in beta or not. So I would say probably at the beginning of next year. What beginning means, I'm not sure, but I think we're getting close to beta.
Yeah, just quick one addition to Florina, what Florina said, because one more thing that like devs looking at is like how they work with files, because like there's some in some migration you may touch with some files a couple times and through result in some exceptions. That's a technical hurdle, but it like didn't expect it, so they're looking at that. It makes things a bit slower as well, but yeah, it's coming.
Okay. So the next one is interesting. So what is the next big thing coming up for Android developers? Could you give us a sneak peek?
I'll take it. Very, very biased answer. Obviously, Compose. We're working really hard on releasing Compose, and we think we haven't redone how you build UI in 10 years. So to us, Compose is a huge step for developers. It's a very big change. It's going to mean huge improvements. Again, very biased opinion because I work on Compose. But I think that's definitely the biggest thing that we're aiming to do next year. Anyone else have a different?
No, I can add a little bit to this. Like I feel like Android became so huge, especially like if you compare it to like the early days. So like it's impossible to follow. So in every area there's quite big things happening, and like you may not really know, or like if you're not working in that area, you don't really follow, you don't listen, use and so on. I don't know. This, like for framework teams, like this mainline system, like. Not sure what's the official name, but like the thing that we're splitting it to the modules, we're trying to make it more updatable and so on. It's a very large effort. It's going on for years already. Like it was announced at I/O, so like it's a big story. It will come up and like it will actually happen in dev's life. It's a future, but it's for our part of organization. This is one of the biggest thing that's happening.
Sure, thanks. So the next one is, what is the outlook for Android apps that still use Java?
I can try to answer this one. I would say right now where Java is definitely still supported, and with most of the Jetpack libraries, they can successfully be used in the Java programming world as well. But I think as you're starting to see, more and more of the libraries that we're creating are in Kotlin. So, for example, data store is built in Kotlin. So this means that if you want to use it in Java, then it means you have to either wait for the bindings to be implemented or use bindings going from coroutines to Java implementations. And then if you think about Compose, well, you have to have Kotlin you have to have migrated to Kotlin to use Compose. Anyone else wants to add to this question?
I can add a bit. Yeah, I feel like we still spend quite a lot of effort in just like looking at the new libraries. We still spend the time, even if you're writing the Kotlin, in answering the question how people will use it in Java. With Compose, unfortunately, answer is like given the complexity of Compose and what we do, it's impossible. But for smaller libraries, I mean, like basically everything else smaller than Compose, because Compose is huge. We definitely look at that, and like the data store that Florina talked about, for example, is implements binding to RxJava. So if you're using Java plus RxJava, you have a binding right away from the team. So we try to make experience there possible and better.
All right. So the next thing is, any plans to make libraries shared between apps to reduce size?
I can take this one, yeah. So answer is like, decided like internally we look at that a lot of times to trying to figure out if there is a big win. In surprising answer is like whenever like people try to like more accurately collect the data in general, like what is the win, or if there is a win. The answer is like there is no win. There is like multiple reasons for this, and like for example, there's ProGuard. So like currently all libraries are coming, like most of the apps are coming ProGuarded, especially like top apps definitely coming ProGuarded. Lower, like not so much, but like still top apps are ProGuarded. So then it means like you have to ship not ProGuarded version. Then they use different versions of libraries. So you still come like you have like dozens of apps. They may not share, like they share different versions. So like as a result, it shows that like ProGuarded versions of different are actually smaller than like few not ProGuarded versions on the device. So this is a short answer. I think we will look again, maybe for some very specific libraries internally, but mostly now.
Okay, thanks. So let's get back to Compose since we have a lot of Compose questions for a bit. So the burning question is, your team is pushing both Flutter and Jetpack Compose. Which one would you recommend to use?
Yeah, I love this question. I can take that. Yes, Google produces two UI toolkits. We're a big company working on lots of things. I'd say that you should evaluate them, like look at the strengths of both and decide what's a better fit for your use case. Flutter has its own strengths, so I would let the Flutter team speak to that. You know, they're focused on cross-platform and pushing out web and so on. We're all from the Android team where a lot of us work on Compose, and I'd say the strengths of Compose, we talked about it earlier, the fact it's in Kotlin, which a lot of Android developers are already very productive and familiar with and have a huge set of tooling and libraries built up around already. It's from the Android team, so we work on making sure it integrates with existing architectures. It's easier to incrementally adopt into it. It's the future of the Android toolkit, so we're going to keep on investing it, and any kind of like first-party stuff is going to be working with Jetpack Compose going forward. So I'd say look at it for your team, work out what's best there, really.
Truly said. So the next Compose question is, how will Compose integrate with Jetpack navigation? Will it make Jetpack navigation obsolete?
Yeah, I'll take this one. No, actually, the team works on the integration between them. There are a couple of like interesting questions in exact details. However, short answer is no. People are working at the same team that did navigation right now, works on makes on like binding layer between navigation and Compose. So learn navigation, learn Compose, both will be needed in your future.
I would
Probably
double down. Please go ahead, Manu.
No, I was gonna say that so as a follow-up, I think navigation is gonna be the recommended way to do navigation in Compose, and so we want to also to improve the 16 libraries, the Compose integration, and the existing library with we're having both working at the same time together. So something like having an interop story between the navigation library and the Compose extension is something very important to us, because we want to be, we want navigation to be the way to handle navigation in your UI, basically in all the Android ecosystem. So please use it and give us feedback as well. I think the team is also trying to integrate and move the actual extension, the Compose extension, into the main library, because as we were talking, like Compose is the future. So there shouldn't be that such differentiation between the two of them. It should be navigation and that's it. So please use navigation.
All right. So with Compose, it seems like a lot of current UI-related libraries will become useless or redundant. Will they be supported, continued separately, or become part of the Compose framework?
I can try to answer this. Sorry. I think it means we're thinking about which kind of libraries. So stuff like view binding or data binding will only be useful if you're still using the view system. And then I'll let Nick continue with the rest.
Yeah, so I think a lot of them will not be part of the Compose solution. So things like Recycler View, for example, there is an alternative, which is way better, by the way, version in Compose called Lazy List. Some things you'll continue to use via interop. So I'm not quite sure what you mean by UI related libraries. I mean, there's things which are kind of tangential to, like, do you consider map view or advertising views? I guess they display in the UI, and we don't currently have plans to rewrite them just yet in a Compose native version. But that's where Compose shines with its interop with views, in that you're able to embed views inside a Compose hierarchy and vice versa, but Compose inside a view hierarchy. So our plan right now is to make it easy to embed it. Perhaps we'll provide an easy wrapper around some views. We're not quite sure yet, but yeah, a lot of the UI stuff will be replaced. But that isn't to say that we have to throw it away. You can still interop and still use the existing solutions and migrate, gradually to Compose as need be. If there are other UI related libraries that we're not answering, then perhaps you could add another question, because I'm not certain we're answering your question completely.
All right, thanks. Speaking about UI libraries, like someone has asked, when can we expect Jetpack Compose support for video view, grid view, and leanback?
I can take this one. So for video view, do we even have video view? Isn't it media player? But I know I've seen some community contributions already of people using ExoPlayer with Compose. Like, that's where interop shines. Like, you can still use all of the media player libraries that are out there. So it's all interoperable. For grid view, we do have an equivalent. We have a lazy grid, goes with the equivalent for Recycler View that Nick just mentioned. So we are doing anything that is layout related, we do natively in Compose. Leanback, this is kind of beyond the app development that we're looking at now. We're really focused on phone, and we want to make sure we get our 1.0 in the future. I'm sure we will be looking at further beyond phone.
Okay, thanks. So coming back to Jetpack navigation for a bit, so are there any plans to support multi-module projects without workarounds, like using deep links?
Yeah, unfortunately, answer to this, like, I'm not entirely sure about the question. Maybe just because, like, I don't work that closely on navigation lately. But I'm not sure which workarounds meant here. But like, basically, multiple modules, you can include one graph from an hour. So you can. It's not a problem. It works without hack. Like, you just include one module from one graph to another. I know from, like, back in the times, people try to avoid some dependencies in the graph, but like, they kind of want it to be your graph like as one whole. So basically, they want it to be one thing, but they don't want to expose the proper API from one module to another. And as a result, we were like, how we do this? But you cannot do this. It's if those modules are dependent one to another, because like, one graph is a part of another graph. You have a dependency between them. You have to expose the API, some kind of API, in your graph, maybe this kind of API when you include one to another. I remember those kind of questions. So like, unfortunately, you have to be explicit about like those dependency. And the navigation dependency is still a dependency, and so you may think like it's just show like setting screens, so like you don't have to know anything about it. Well, from graph perspective, it's still a dependency. Sorry for probably bad answer.
I think just to follow up a little bit on this, I think the problems that may happen with navigation in multimodule projects, it's just because of the nature of, for example, if you use dynamic feature modules, that might be more problematic because the way that modules depend on each other. So, for example, with dynamic feature modules, there are some problems with using safe arcs because the annotation processor cannot generate the right classes, and we have the same problems with other libraries. So I think there are some work in progress to try to mitigate that issue, but yeah, that's how multimodule works. And if you use dynamic feature modules, you might get a little bit more limitations, but you get other benefits.
All right. Now that we have talked about Compose for a little bit, let's try to get back to a little non-Compose questions. Maybe architecture one. So the first one is, what architecture should we use when building declarative UI with Compose? Do you think we will have Redux architecture imported to Jetpack in the future?
Yeah, so this looks like a maybe two-way question, like both composed and non-composed. I would say that what we want to do is to make sure that folks are able to use the same architecture independent on what kind of view implementation they have, if it's views or composed. So looking at something like unidirectional data flow is definitely something that that we want to do. We are working on improving in general our guidance on architecture, because we know that it's a little bit outdated. So we'll try to provide guidance on both the views and the composed world architecture.
I'll quickly follow up on this a little bit. I feel like to answer to Redux, my bet is that like community will re-implement Redux in Compose. However, I don't think Redux re-implementation will happen inside the team. We briefly looked at that, and like currently we didn't decide to go with it. This may change, obviously this may change, but like looking at the community, how people are active and what people do, I would think like something like Redux will be done in community. And maybe it will be great, maybe not. Who knows? It's not done.
Okay. So the next one is regarding view models. If you have a single activity with multiple fragments, would you use one single view model or multiple view models? What would you recommend?
I can take this one. So how I think about in general when I think about an app architecture is single responsibility principle. If you would use one view model, what would be the responsibility of that view model? Would that view model be responsible for everything that's related to other fragments? Probably that would be too much. So what I would do is probably have one view model per fragment or per activity. So separate things as much as possible.
Okay. So another thing related to architecture. So MVVM or MVI for high scalable apps. Do you have any thoughts or suggestions?
Okay, I'll start. Probably Florina will jump later. This is like a personal opinion, and I think like I don't have any recommendation. But anytime you decide to take one of them, is just like you have to look what they give you exactly. So better like understand like okay, yeah, I'm going to create, because most of the times those things are quite verbose. So you have to understand like what are the pluses, what are the cons, so like what you will get once you start any of this approach. So like, and you see if you actually get a lot, or you get just a lot of boilerplate and you just follow philosophy just because it's was promoted by someone. So I would really, really suggest you to dive deeper and see for your use case if it works better or not. For example, I know like some bigger companies, people look at that and say like, well, we're going to have just fragments plus views, and that's basically it. We won't have any fancy architectures because they don't see them enough value that they bring, like all those iterations, vs all this boilerplate and like repetitiveness of these frameworks. So this is my personal take.
I also think like for some people that don't know that much about this pattern is that the good thing here is that both use unidirectional data flow. That as we were talking previously, it's pretty important for Compose, and also the way to expose that data to the UI layer. It's what matters in my opinion as well. So I think both options might be a great fit for your application, and probably something to take in mind here. And to keep in mind is how you are gonna invalidate the UI. So if you have a large application, you might want to split and have different reactive streams for independent parts of the UI versus having a one single screen that may invalidate the whole thingy. So it depends. Obviously, you can do both things. You can optimize updating the UI when it's needed with one or multiple streams, but you have to make sure about that, and you have to keep that in mind regardless of the architecture that you use. But both of them are pretty popular in Android, and I'm sure both of them will be a great.
Yeah, I totally agree. So we at Over, we have a combination. Like, so how I like to think about it is like these are not really architectures; these are patterns. And if you have a complex screen, you can go ahead and design a particular screen according to MVI. And if you think that the screen is not going to be too complex, another screen, you can go ahead and use MVVM for that. Like, you can do a mix and like, so this is how we have done. We have divided our screens into complicated versus non-complicated, and yeah, that's how we have done. So moving on to the next one, it's also a little bit a mix of compose and a single activity in architecture wise. So how to implement single activity approach with Jetpack Compose? Is there any standardized architecture or sample?
I'll take this one. I think like the most of the samples are actually like our single activity. So you just look at any of them and they will be single activity. Basically, because most of the time your activity is started, you render like you have like your composable that represents first screen. Then something happened and you want to go to the next screen. It will be changed inside of this like first composable kind of that will embed like multiple other composables. So like every navigation will happen mostly inside of the inside of one activity. So there is like navigational module that is in works now of how to do this, but basically compose embraces model. If you look at any sample, it's single activity, so nothing specifically that you need to done here. There are usual glitches around like single activity, and like there's some cases when you need actually two, but it's a different story.
Yeah, to follow up with that and some samples, what I would say is I would recommend people to check out the Compose Samples GitHub repo, where we have, I think it's 8 samples with a lot of cool stuff. And I would also recommend reading the README before looking at the sample, because there you will find like which properties each sample might have. So for example, I think the crane sample uses a couple of activities just to showcase how to do that, because in your app you might be doing interop or whatever, and you might have the necessity to have different activities, and how to interact between those activities can also be found in the sample. Also, for example, crane uses hilt as a dependency injection solution, and we have a bunch of samples trying to come up with different patterns, where the team is also experimenting with different configurations and things, and we're trying to see the pros and cons of all of them, because you might probably have those questions in the future as well. So check out the samples, check out the readmes, and I hope you learn a lot from them.
Oh, thanks. Looks like we have a lot of compose questions, so we're getting back to answering compose ones now. So the next one is like, when will compose go into beta?
I'll take this one. As we mentioned before, we've already said publicly, we're really trying to do a 1.0 next year. And as a pre-step to that, obviously beta needs to happen before we can do a 1.0. So you should expect it next year.
Awesome. Next one is a bit also related. Like, looks like people are a bit concerned about the stability and when can they really start using it in their production apps. So the question is, as Jetpack Compose is in alpha, so is it good to move with this code in production for a very large scale of an app similar? Yeah.
I can take this one. I'd say it depends on your timescales. Like if you have an app already in production, then I would probably wait until we reach the higher levels of stability. So when we change from alpha to beta or beyond. Because right now, like as we talked about earlier, in case you missed it, we're still working on, stabilizing is the right word, really. We don't want to be freshing with major API changes once we hit beta. So we're working very hard on making sure a lot of anything which can have major API implications is in before we label something beta. So as Clara said before, we're working on changing some of the APIs to be built on top of coroutines. We're working hard on a lot of accessibility, as well as just like polishing and working on feedback and bugs that you all have filed to make sure the APIs are the right APIs before we try and stabilize them and make less changes in them. So if you have an app in production already, then it might not be the right time while we're in alpha, and still we reserve the right essentially to change the APIs while in alpha. That's kind of what alpha means for us. I would caveat that with, if you're working on a new app which hasn't launched yet, and it depends on your timeline. So maybe it might make sense to start investing in like learning Compose or even using Compose. Like we said, we're targeting next year to go stable. So depending on when you're launching, essentially views will become tech debt at some point, that Compose is the future. So you kind of need to look at it, your use case, your timeline better than we do. And think about when it makes sense to kind of start adopting.
I'll quickly add one more thing there. Of course, it depends on like flexibility and the leadership and so on. However, like in an ideal world, in a large organization, I would probably spare 1 or 2 people now to look at Compose and prepare a plan on how you're going to adopt it, or like which stages. So basically, they come up with a plan, prepare some maybe like groundwork and sort of like some like integrations with build system, because usually there's some complication with build systems and so on and so on and so on. If it's a very large org, you can kind of afford to do this. And then once Compose will be ready, you can gradually migrate your app, and when you have a plan and so on. But probably if you're in the production, it's a bit too early right now.
Yeah, so just to quickly add on to that, the thing is that I was a little bit surprised there was no questions about testing. I think something very important in Android development is testing your code, because either if you adopt Compose now or in the future, you have to test your UI, and in case that you migrate in the future, you want to make sure that you don't have any regression with newer APIs or newer versions of Compose. So even if you create now, if you adopt it or not, test your application, because it's going to be pretty crucial in the future.
All right. So the next one is, does Compose support constraint layout or something similar?
The great answer is yes, we do. We started constraint layout support very early because we heard very loud and clear that developers love constraint layout. So we've been working very closely with the constraint layout team. We've been integrating very closely. About 3 weeks ago, we moved, so that code used to be in the main Compose repository. We have now moved it to be a module within constraint layout. So it hasn't released yet. I think we're going to move the alphas just like we're moving Compose. It's going to be released in parallel to constraint layout from that module group. But yes, it's definitely in the works.
If I could just build on that a little bit, I'd say one of the interesting things about Compose for me is that the model of layout is it basically disallows multiple measure cycles. And so, that was a big problem in Android, that you could get yourself into really expensive performance problems if you were nesting layouts, especially things like relative layout or weighted linear layouts, which could get into these kind of quadratic kind of measurement passes. So that isn't a concern anymore. So while constraint layout is an awesome option for a lot of the flexibility the API gives you for aligning things and complex layouts, the Compose layout system also, you can use it without fear of performance issues. So yeah, use both, like use the right tool for the right job, I'd say. If it's a simpler layout, like look at the rows and columns, which can be easier to kind of understand or kind of build a mental model and debug that code, and use constraint layout for maybe the more complex things where its API really, really shines. So yeah, it's there, but yeah, do take a look at the other layout models as well.
To build on the build-up, it is true that Compose has single pass measurement, but constraint layout is the one exception right now. So we are doing multiple passes for constraint layout, and we're not sure. We're looking into, can we reduce that to one pass? It's one of the things that we're looking into for beta. I'm not sure where it will end.
All right, thanks. So the next question about Compose is, I think the material library for Android recently added the extended fab with text. Does Compose allow for this?
I'll take this. Yes, it does. There's an extended fab composable function. So that's all I have to say about that. But yeah, it's the same component and should behave in the same way.
All right. So I want to do a little bit of sidetrack. I think I personally also want to know about this. Like, if you have an app that has been in development for over 3 years and it uses RX Java heavily, how to transition such an app to Kotlin Flow and coroutines?
Yeah, I can take this one. One of the benefits of learning RxJava in the past is that actually most of the concepts can be brought to Kotlin, coroutines and Flow at the moment. So pretty much everything in RxJava maps one-to-one with something in coroutines and Flow. So for example, if you have a single or a maybe or a completable object, you can have that as a suspend function in coroutines. So as for migrating, there is a library that allows to have interop between RxJava and coroutines. So you can check it out. It allows you to, await for a maybe or await for something that you wanted to, and have the RxJava coroutines interop there. But also, like, you have to keep in mind, for example, whenever you switch to another thread in RxJava, make sure that you do the same in coroutines. So pretty much, as I was saying, you have a one-to-one mapping relationship there. So check out what is the equivalent, and you can start migrating in your code easily.
Awesome, thanks. So we have a question related to Work Manager. Can the Work Manager be used in every use case for which the sync adapter framework has been used until now?
Yeah, I'll take this one. Again, probably not the greatest answer. I haven't heard sync adapter name like in years now, so I was like super surprised, to be honest, that it came up here. So answer is, yeah, definitely use Work Manager most of the time. Sync adapter probably has a very, very niche use case now. However, from what I know, most of the time it was like heavily abused for things that it shouldn't do. So yes, Work Manager should be the answer. If you really work with accounts and the things around accounts, maybe sync adapter can be, or like not can be, it's still the option for you. But most of the time, default is for Work Manager. And if something very specific happens and like you realize, oh, I need to work with accounts and so on, and like some capabilities are not available, I'm not entirely sure if those capabilities actually exist. However, like if it's the case, maybe you fall back to sync adapter. But start with Work Manager always. Definitely a better option.
All right. So we have another question for Jetpack Work Manager. The result observer provides live data. Are there any plans to upgrade this and use coroutines or state flow?
I can take that. I'm not quite sure about the development of such integration, but what you can easily do is that you can actually convert that live data to flow, and that would be it. You wouldn't have any problems. Sergey, do you know if we are,
So I can quickly add this. So basically, right now, Work Manager doesn't depend on Kotlin, and like in the main part of it. So it can't provide anything very specific in regards to this. So it cannot be like other way around. So basically, ideally, in ideal world, what we do is like we would have a coroutines and on top, or flow, and on top of that we would have a live data, because like flows are a bit more lower level than live data. However, now it is impossible because it would mean that we bring the Kotlin as a dependency, and it's currently no for different reasons, because like it bumps the size and so on and so on. However, it's currently not in the plan, but I guess it may happen somewhere in the future in a couple of years.
All right. So the next one is flow related. Flow is still on experimental. Any idea when it will come stable or it's secure to use on production apps development?
Yeah, it was in experimental probably in 2019 or something. Like in the last years, like most APIs have been promoted to stable, and actually in the last release, which was like last month or so with the stateflow and shellflow implementation. I think it's in 1.4.x because we have a 0.2 now. But what I would say is that timeout. It is stable at the moment. There are some APIs that are an experimental, but I mean, for example, things like callback flow or channel flow are an experimental, but most of the core functionality and most APIs are stable. So don't feel afraid of using it in production.
All right. So firstly, thanks a lot, everyone, for asking so many questions. So we are going to take one last question, and that is, should I convert all my libraries to Android X from support libraries? If I convert it, how will an app with support library use the library?
I'd say yes, convert it. You should have already converted by now because everything that we're doing in Jetpack is now in Android X. So yeah, migrate to Android X, Jetify your application. And you shouldn't have support library and Android X libraries at the same time in your app. When you're converting, you'll have to convert all of your libraries to Android X.
Okay, thanks a lot, everyone, again, for asking so many questions. And thanks for the team for answering all those questions without, any... yeah. Okay, I think this is it.
Thank you, Garima, for moderating.
My pleasure.
Thank you.